How did I not know about this? Why didn't someone warn me? Had I known, I would have never fallen into this.
This quote is from a 17-year-old survivor of sex trafficking. So, what do you know about human trafficking?
What we're going to talk about today is a topic that can be unsettling to the core: human trafficking. It's estimated that 50 million people are enslaved globally, and worldwide it's a $150 billion a year industry, 2/3 of which comes from sex trafficking and is second only to illegal drugs and global sales and tied with illegal arms sales.
Traffickers have realized that you can sell drugs or a gun only once, but you can sell a human being over and over again.
To many, it's brushed under the rug or falls into that, well, that can't happen to me category in your brain. To those it affects, it impacts and alters lives in ways many of us can't imagine.
But the good news is we don't have to stand by and ignore it anymore. And by the end of this video, the hope is you come away with a clear sense of what this is, how it starts, the impact it has, and how you can help.
To break this down, let's talk about what human trafficking is and what human trafficking isn't.
Human trafficking is not the same as human smuggling,
which involves illegal border crossings. These two are often confused because yes, by definition, smuggling is illegal, but it is not always forced or coerced.
This might look like a migrant family or group illegally crossing a border in hopes of a better life. While they may not be going through the proper steps, that's not human trafficking.
But here's where this can get tricky, as smuggling can turn into trafficking.
If the smuggler makes additional demands from the previously agreed upon deal and/or forces acts of sex or labor in order to profit for said smuggler's benefit, you have just crossed over from smuggling to trafficking.
Remember, traffickers prey on the most vulnerable people. People from another country who don't speak the language or know the laws and may have left dangerous situations in their homeland are very vulnerable. Here's what it is.
Human trafficking is the unlawful act of transporting or coercing people in order to benefit from their work or service.
typically in the form of forced labor or sexual exploitation.
It must include the use of force, fraud, or coercion unless it is a commercial sex act involving a person under the age of 18. A commercial sex act means any sex act where anything of value is received by any person.
And coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats.
A minor cannot legally give consent, so they do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And that person is a victim of sex trafficking, not a criminal. Also, there's no such thing as a child prostitute, as they are all victims of sexual assault or rape.
There are two basic types of human trafficking: labor trafficking and sex trafficking.
Labor trafficking can happen in many types of work. Agriculture, tourism, hospitality industries, construction industries, restaurant and food industry, as well as domestic work are just a few types where labor trafficking occurs.
But it has also been found in nail salons, door-to-door sales, and even begging rings.
Young people can also be recruited via ads for summer jobs.
All victims of labor trafficking must be able to prove force, fraud, or coercion, no matter their age. This can be a deflating uphill battle for victims, so please do a little research before you accept a job.
Then there's sex trafficking, which many people associate with prostitution, but it also happens in strip clubs, illicit massage businesses, pornography, as well as hotels and motels, and even private homes. This is happening everywhere. This is everywhere.
Traffickers set up detailed operations anywhere large crowds are gathered, from sporting events to conventions and conferences, theme parks, and even truck stops.
It's a crime that literally happens in plain sight. It can even be delivered to the front door.
According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, sex trafficking takes place in several ways.
Pimp control trafficking,
where an unrelated male or female develops an intentional relationship with the person, which is later used as leverage in the exploitation.
Gang control trafficking
uses their organization to instill fear and loyalty in the victim.
Familial trafficking,
when a relative or a person who is perceived to be family traffics another family member. According to Polaris, 42% of trafficking victims were exploited by someone they know, a family member, acquaintance, or romantic partner. For example, A drug-addicted mom in Tampa was convicted of human trafficking because she was offering her landlord his choice of one of her 3 daughters instead of paying rent. This also shows that a victim does not have to be moved to be trafficked.
Then there's buyer-perpetrator trafficking, where there is not an identified trafficker. Instead, the buyer is directly exploiting the person's vulnerabilities by offering money, food, and/or shelter in exchange for a sexual act.
In the case of a runaway or homeless person, agreeing to a sex act in exchange for food or a bed is called survival sex and is considered buyer-perpetrated trafficking.
We've mentioned exploitation. Okay, so what is exploitation?
General exploitation is treating a person unfairly to benefit from their work. Exploitation can involve the use of threats, manipulation, or even force to get someone to do something they don't want to do for the benefit of another person.
An example of this would be like an employer forcing an employee to work for little to no pay. It could also look like a romantic partner threatening harm if their partner doesn't perform sex acts for money, drugs, or a place to stay.
One of the most commonly widespread myths about human trafficking is that it involves kidnapping or physically forcing someone into a situation.
In reality, most traffickers use psychological means such as tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening victims into providing commercial sex or exploitive labor.
Now, with that being said, these traffickers are pros. They are very adept at targeting the most vulnerable people and seeking out the missing need or want in the lives of the potential victims.
Kids with low self-esteem or lonely people simply looking for acceptance.
The LGBTQ+ population.
People in homes where a caregiver or a family member has a substance abuse issue.
Students with intellectual and developmental differences.
Young people who are or were in the child welfare system or juvenile justice system.
Dropouts, runaways, and homeless youth.
Young people with personal substance abuse issues.
Immigrants who have a language barrier.
And especially people with financial difficulties.
Everyone is fair game, no matter their race, gender, culture, religion, or amount of education. Young people are especially vulnerable due to their age and life inexperience. They simply trust the wrong people sometimes.
For a child in an abusive household situation, their home life may be so bad that the lure of life with a trafficker seems like a great option. Children who grow up in a household where that is all they know don't even realize that they are being abused. Sadly, more than 40% of minors are trafficked by a family member or someone close to the family.
Many people think of traffickers as men, and the word pimp reinforces that. However, women play a major role in this illegal industry too. Traffickers have also been known to place an underage girl in a high school and reward her if she invites more girls to a party. He might also punish her if she's not successful. This situation turns the victim into a victimizer while creating a toxic fear versus reward style dominance over the victim.
Traffickers are calculated individuals that will take weeks or even months to gain a victim's trust, painting a picture of promises of a life with greener grass on the other side.
This is called grooming. Grooming happens, you guessed it, everywhere. In fact, over 50% of survivors have said they were first contacted online. For every open chat app and gaming outlet, there are predators looking for their next victim.
Grooming is a manipulative process used by traffickers to recruit and gain control over their victims. It involves building trust, making an emotional connection, and exploiting vulnerabilities to trick victims into trafficking situations.
The predator is usually an adult, but might pretend to be a young person. They might know a lot about popular music artists, clothing trends, sports team information, or another activity or hobby in which the minor may be interested so that they can relate to the youth.
Groomers have no problem sending their future victim an online gift card in order to gain their trust. Of course, in order to do so, they'll require a little more personal information. A predator can piece together clues from those seemingly innocent conversations, including parents' names, where you go to school, and some of your interests. They may not ask for your address, but they may ask how far you live from a certain park or store.
It's also common for a predator to tell their potential victim, "Don't tell anyone." That can apply to a plan to meet in person. Once being victimized, it can also be a threat to keep them silent about their current situation.
They will affirm feelings and choices of possible victims, drive a wedge between the child and his or her parents and friends, and exploit natural sexual curiosities of the youth. From there, they often gradually introduce sex into the conversation or expose their victim to pornography. and make promises of an exciting, stress-free life with every desire fulfilled.
This process of online grooming can be short or last for an extended period of time. The conversations typically start out very innocent. Once the groomer knows trust is gained, they will prey on your desire for romance, adventure, and sexual information.
This is the point of the video where we ask you to please end the sexting trend. Please, and here's why.
Once it's out there, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No trust level is high enough to compromise your integrity.
Are you comfortable with this image being out in the world?
Would you want your future boss, college of your choice, family, and friends to see this image?
And if it's not something you would want your grandmother to see, don't post it.
So here's something to consider. Many of us have this.
And with every app, one must click the box saying you agree to these terms and conditions.
What if you would click agree to the following? Losing control of the most intimate images of your body. You will have little to no legal options if you want the pornographic images circulating across all platforms taken down. You agree to allow porn users to label and attack you on social media if you try to take legal action. It seems crazy, I know. But believe it or not, there is actually a sexting consent form created by Dr. Gail Dines to bring the point home.
Whether the latest or next app promises encryption or disappearing photos in a certain period of time, screenshots enable anything displayed on a recipient's screen to be captured.
Once the victim has reached this point with the groomer, they now have the ammo to make threats and use these explicit pictures of their victims to blackmail them into silence, otherwise known as sextortion. Now, just because they have this ammo doesn't mean they're ready to use it, because the ultimate goal of the groomer is to arrange an in-person meeting to engage in sexual relations with their victim.
One way to protect yourself online is to only communicate with people you know in person, whether it's on social media, gaming platforms, and messaging apps.
Pause. Earlier we mentioned sexting and sextortion. While we're on these dopamine elevating activities, let's talk about pornography.
Some call it digital drugs.
Because frequent viewing can literally change the brain and alter dopamine levels, similar to substance addiction. Human brains are not fully developed until about age 25, particularly the frontal regions that help with impulse control and assessing risk.
Even moderate porn consumption is correlated with shrunken gray matter in parts of the brain that oversee intellectual function.
It often happens accidentally, and no one needs to point fingers or shame anyone here. And of course, not everyone that views porn is an addict or will become an addict.
But in super simple terms, pornography consumption is usually an unhealthy coping mechanism that hijacks and overstimulates the pleasure center of the brain.
You know, it seems like porn is more difficult to avoid than to find. Every second, 28,000 internet users are viewing porn and 260 new sites appear each day. This has forced a gradual desensitization and definite relaxation of societal norms about porn. One common misconception is that, come on, let's be real, it's a guy thing. But the truth is there's been an increase in the number of women viewing porn as well. The person who consumes porn may argue that it's no big deal and they're affecting no one but themselves. But some of those actors in some of those videos may be victims of human trafficking who have been told to perform or else.
This is a vicious cycle. The porn industry wants everybody as a customer. The person consuming porn has no way to know what kind of consent the actors have given. Traffickers show their victims porn to normalize the sex acts they're forcing them to perform. The consumer who is no longer excited from watching porn then seeks the next thrill, which could be purchasing sex, which might very well be from a trafficking victim that was shown pornography.
These people are even targeting 6 to 10-year-olds by putting click here buttons on gaming sites. The child thinks they're going to get clues or rewards, but instead they're met with a pornographic pop-up. They can't unsee it, don't know what to do with these feelings, and may potentially seek it out again. There are no boundaries, and it's 2 clicks away from anyone with a device and the internet. Parents can install firewalls, hoping to keep kids safe, but we all know kids have gotten around them. The only person who can resist that click is you.
Okay, let's get back to trafficking now. I'm sure some of you are asking yourselves, why don't they leave? Why can't they just walk away? Most victims of sex and labor trafficking aren't held up in chains, as some human trafficking related images may suggest. Rather, fear of violence and threats against family members are leading control mechanisms, as well as using drugs to create another level of dependency. Traffickers will often move their victims to cut them off from current contacts and prevent them from gaining access to any support network or establishing new relationships.
Often victims of sex trafficking, especially minors, do not identify themselves as victims. Rather, they see their trafficker as the boyfriend who loves them or the family member who has their back. They may not even recognize the depth of manipulation in which they're involved and often believe they're willing participants or that they choose to be involved in prostitution.
A romantic interest that says, if you love me, you'd do this, is only concerned about themselves. This shame, guilt, and loyalty is all part of the trafficker's plan to maintain control over his victim.
Traffickers portray themselves as the savior who is going to take care of the victim and solve all of their problems. So police and authority figures are certainly not going to be trusted. We need boots on the ground.
We believe in the dignity of all human beings and the right to be compensated fairly for any work. But traffickers take that dignity and have no regard for fair compensation or quality of life.
How can I help? Are you good?
How can I help?
Are you good?
What can I do? Do you need help? Is there anything I can do? Are you okay? How can I help?
Educate yourself. Don't be afraid to talk about this.
Resist the click. Don't let the porn industry dictate your time. You've got too much talent to waste.
Earlier, we mentioned human trafficking truly hides in plain sight. So here are some common signs we need to keep our eyes on.
If someone is not allowed to speak on their own behalf, if they have a lack of control over personal schedule, money, ID, and their travel documents,
If they're transported to or from work, or lives and works in the same place,
if they show physical signs of violence, being fearful, overly submissive, or depressed,
If they are branded with tattoos of traffickers' names or symbols,
if they have an inability to provide an address and have numerous inconsistencies in their story,
or maybe you notice changes in a classmate's behavior. They're absent often or start showing up with expensive items, jewelry or clothing.
so if you see something, say something. Tell a trusted adult.
And while these are general or common indicators of human trafficking, the goal here is to keep you from falling for the promises of a trafficker, so that one day you're not sitting there saying, how did I not know? And that you might go home and share some of this information with your siblings, or that you and your lunch table talk about that one thing that one time that may have seemed off. The goal is to keep the conversation going.
We've all encountered relationships, whether our own or someone else's, where we grow concerned about behaviors or realize later on that they were manipulative. Pledge to be that friend who learns what love isn't, what trafficking is, and chooses to tell the truth. So now, what do you know about human trafficking?